But behind him, in the quiet warmth of the living room, sat Clara. She wasn't looking at the skyline. She was looking at her hands, resting gently on the soft swell of her belly, 5 months pregnant, wrapped in an old cashmere sweater that had seen better days. A half-finished cup of chamomile tea cooled on the table beside her. Outside, the world roared. Inside, there was only the gentle rhythm of breath and the quiet hope growing inside her. Daniel, she called softly, voice barely above a whisper, but it carried through the silence like a prayer. He turned, his polished mask slipping just enough to reveal a flicker of something. Guilt exhaustion before smoothing over again. Yeah, she offered a small smile, the kind that came from deep places, not surface charm. The baby kicked today, 3 times. Strong. He stepped closer, but didn't sit, didn't touch her, just hovered, like he was afraid to get too close to something fragile. That's good, he said, voice flat. Clara's smile lingered, but her eyes dimmed. She'd learned to read the spaces between his words, the silence where affection used to live. Once, he'd rushed home just to feel the baby move. Once, he'd read psalms aloud to her belly before bed. Now, he came home later, spoke less, looked past her. Did you eat? She asked, trying to anchor them in normalcy. Grabbed something at the office. He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, Bella's doing a photo shoot downtown tonight. Asked if I'd stop by after the merger call. Clara's breath hitched just slightly. She knew Bella. Everyone in their circle knew Bella Vance, flawless on magazine covers, radiant at galas, the kind of woman who turned heads without trying. Clara had never felt threatened by her until now. She's nice, Clara offered carefully, not wanting to sound jealous, not wanting to sound angry, just human. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, the gesture weary. It's not about nice, Clara. It's about feeling seen. The words hung in the air like frost. Clara's fingers curled gently around her stomach, as if shielding the life within from the chill. I see you, Daniel, she said, voice trembling only at the edges. Every day, even when you forget to look back. He didn't answer right away. The city lights blinked below, indifferent. I don't know who I am anymore, he admitted, finally, voice raw. In this suit, in these rooms, I'm just a name on a contract. But with her, I feel alive. Clara closed her eyes, not in anger, in sorrow, for him, for them, for the dream they built that was now crumbling like dry sand through open fingers. You were alive with me too, she whispered. Before the money, before the penthouse. Remember our apartment in Brooklyn, the leaky faucet, the second-hand couch. You used to say you'd never trade it for anything. A beat of silence. I was younger then, he said, but it sounded more like an excuse than a truth. She nodded slowly, not arguing, not begging, just accepting. God doesn't stop loving us when we forget who we are, she said softly, more to herself than to him. Maybe he's still calling you back. Daniel looked at her then, really looked, at the quiet strength in her posture, the grace in her eyes even now, when her world was breaking. For a moment, something flickered in his chest. A memory, a longing, a ghost of the man he used to be. But it faded too quickly. I'll be back late, he said, turning toward the door. Clara didn't say goodnight. She just placed a hand over her heart, then over her womb, and whispered, so softly only heaven could hear, hold us, Lord. Both of us, even the one walking away. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. The city kept moving, but in that quiet room, something sacred had just fractured, and something else, deeper and truer, had begun to rise from the broken pieces. Certo, agora tu como narrador e storyteller disinvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada topico que for disinvolve. Mi canti sobrio topico tu com dialogo como su fosso espectador. Sempre lembrando de disinvolver com vida moco. Com vidos sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Calm 6.000 characters Quen 3 max morning light spilled through the gauzy curtains of Clara's bedroom, soft and forgiving, as if the world outside hadn't shattered just days before. She lay in bed, one hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly, eyes open but unfocused, tracing the slow dance of dust motes in the sunlit air. 5 months pregnant. 5 months of hope, of whispered lullabies to the life growing within her, of dreaming in pastels and tiny shoes. And now, 5 months of silence where a husband's voice used to be. The door creaked open slightly. Not Daniel. Never Daniel anymore. It was Mrs. Evans, the elderly neighbor from down the hall, holding a tray with toast, sliced apples, and a steaming mug of ginger tea. "Morning, sweetheart," she said gently, placing the tray on the bedside table. "You barely touched dinner last night." Clara tried to smile, but it wavered like a candle in the wind. "I'm okay, Mrs. Evans. Just tired." "Tired in the body or tired in the soul?" the older woman asked, sitting on the edge of the bed, her voice warm with decades of knowing. Clara's breath caught. She looked down at her stomach, where a tiny foot pressed outward in a firm little kick thump. Her eyes filled. Instantly, "She moves more when I'm sad," Clara whispered, voice trembling. "Like she's trying to tell me, 'Mama, I'm here. You're not alone.'" Mrs. Evans reached out and covered Clara's hand with her own, wrinkled and strong. "That child knows your heart better than anyone. And God, he knows both of you." Clara nodded, swallowing hard. She sat up slowly, wincing as a dull ache pulsed low in her back. A new discomfort the doctor had warned might come with stress. Everything in her body was working so hard to nourish, to protect, to hold on. But her heart felt like cracked porcelain, barely holding its shape. Later that day, at her small desk by the window, Clara opened her journal. The pages were filled with prayers, baby names, sketches of nurseries that would never be built in that penthouse. She picked up her pen, hesitated, then wrote, "Lord, I don't understand why he left, but I trust you haven't. Please be the father she needs if he won't be. And if there's still a chance for him to come back. Not for me but for her, then stir his heart. But if not, help me be enough." Tears blurred the ink. She closed the journal and pressed it to her chest. That afternoon, she forced herself to walk, slowly, carefully, through the park. The air was crisp, autumn painting the trees in fiery reds and golds. Other mothers pushed strollers, laughing with their toddlers. Clara kept her eyes forward, hand resting protectively on her belly, feeling both invisible and painfully visible at once. A young couple passed her, arms linked, the man leaning down to kiss his pregnant wife's forehead. Clara looked away quickly, throat tight. Back home, her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Clara, I've moved some things out. Left the key with building security. I'll transfer this month's support tomorrow. Take care. No, how are you? No, is the baby okay? Just logistics." As if she were a tenant, not the mother of his child. She stared at the screen until her vision blurred. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, she turned off the phone and placed it in a drawer. But later that night, as rain began to patter against the windows, Clara knelt beside her bed, just as she had every night since she was a girl. Back aching, heart heavy, but spirit refusing to surrender. "Father," she began, voice shaking but clear, "I don't have strength for today, but you do. So I'm giving you mine, and taking yours." A strong kick answered her, firm, insistent. She laughed through tears. "You heard that, didn't you, little one? God saying he's with us." Outside, the rain fell harder, washing the city clean. Inside, in the quiet sanctuary of a broken woman's faith, something unshakable was growing. Not just a baby, but a resolve. Clara wasn't just surviving. She was becoming. And though the suspensi aquila sensiceo, sobrio que via contisser, no Ingles, com 6.000 characters Quen 3 max, the rain had stopped by morning, leaving the city glistening under a pale silver sky. Clara sat at her kitchen table, wrapped in a thick shawl, sipping warm lemon water, one hand absently tracing slow circles over her belly. The silence was no longer suffocating. It had become a kind of companion, a quiet space where she could hear her own heartbeat, her child's faint movements, and, if she listened closely enough, the whisper of something wholly moving through the wreckage. But miles away, in a sun-drenched loft in Soho, another woman stirred. Isabella Vance, known to magazines and social feeds simply as Bella, stood barefoot on cool marble floors, wearing nothing but a silk robe and the weight of a life she no longer recognized. Her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror looked flawless high cheekbones, tousled chestnut hair, eyes like storm clouds. But inside, she felt hollow. She picked up her phone, scrolling past a dozen unread messages. Brand deals, party invites, DMs from strangers calling her queen. None of it filled the quiet ache that had settled in her chest weeks ago, right around the time Daniel started talking less about business and more about his wife. "Clara," he'd said once, voice distant. "She prays for me even now." Bella had laughed it off then. "Religious types always think love is sacrifice," she'd said, tossing her hair. But the words had stuck. And now, alone in the echoing luxury of a life she'd built to prove she was enough, she wondered what if love isn't sacrifice, but surrender. Her assistant, Maya, knocked lightly before entering with a tray of espresso and fresh fruit. "You've got the Vogue cover call in an hour. They want to discuss the vulnerability angle. Something about your mysterious past." Bella sighed, wrapping her robe tighter. "Tell them I'm not mysterious, just tired." Maya hesitated. "And," Daniel called again. "Left a message." Bella didn't look up. "Delete it." "You sure he sounded different?" "Different how?" she asked, voice sharper than she intended. "Like he was lost." A beat passed. Bella walked to the window, watching cars glide like silent fish through wet streets below. "He left a pregnant woman for me, Maya. That's not love. That's escape." Maya set the tray down. "Maybe he's realizing that now." Bella turned, eyes glistening. "And what does that make me? The shiny distraction, the glamorous mistake?" "You're Isabella Vance," Maya said firmly. "You built an empire before you were 25. You fund orphanages in Kenya. You cry at dog rescue videos. You're not a mistake. But maybe you've been running too." Bella's breath hitched. She walked to a hidden panel in her closet, pressed a code, and whispered, "It's never too late to come back." Outside, Daniel stood in the hallway, just beyond the door, having arrived silently after the nurses told him Clara was resting. He'd meant to knock, to beg for forgiveness, to promise change. But then he heard their voices, soft, honest, full of grace, and he stopped. He listened as Bella, the woman he'd chosen for her shine, confessed her emptiness. And as Clara, the woman he'd discarded, offered her light without condition. His knees nearly buckled, because in that moment, he saw the truth with brutal clarity. He hadn't left a plain woman for a glamorous one. He'd abandoned a saint for a shadow. He turned and walked away. Not because he didn't care, but because he finally understood he didn't deserve to stand in that room. Not yet, maybe not ever. But as he stepped into the elevator, tears streaming down his face for the first time in years, he whispered a single, broken prayer. "God, if you're real, show me how to be a man worth loving. Not a name, not a fortune, just a man." The doors closed. The hospital hummed on. And in room 312, two women, one carrying a child, the other carrying regret, sat in sacred silence, unaware they'd just become the unlikely instruments of a hand resting on her belly, the other clutching a worn copy of Psalms. Her body ached from the hospital stay, but her spirit, though tender, felt strangely fortified, as if the storm had washed something clean inside her. A soft knock at the door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. Daniel hadn't called. Her pastor had left a note under the door the night before, along with soup and bread. But this knock, gentle, hesitant, felt different. She rose slowly, bracing a hand against the wall, and opened the door. Bella stood there, no makeup, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, wearing jeans and a simple sweater. No designer sunglasses, no entourage, just a woman with tired eyes and a paper bag in her hands. "I brought ginger tea and oatmeal," Bella said softly. "The kind my nanny used to make when I was sick. Said it heals the soul, not just the stomach." Clara didn't move for a moment. Then, with a faint smile, she stepped aside. "Come in." Bella set the bag on the kitchen counter and turned, eyes scanning the modest space. The framed cross above the bookshelf, the stack of prenatal vitamins, the tiny pair of booties half knitted on the coffee table. "You live like you have everything," Bella murmured. "And you live like you're afraid of having nothing." Clara replied gently, not as an accusation, but as an observation. Bella flinched, then nodded. "I've spent my life proving I'm more than my bank account, by pretending I don't have one." She paused, then looked directly at Clara. "I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear it, not as the woman I wronged, but as someone who still believes in grace." Clara sat slowly, gesturing for Bella to do the same. "I'm listening." Bella took a deep breath. "When Daniel came to me, he said he felt invisible, that you'd stopped seeing him as a man, just a provider, a name. I believed him. I wanted to be the one who saw him. But last night, in that hospital, I realized you saw him better than anyone. You saw his soul, even when he turned away." Her voice cracked. "And I used him to fill my own emptiness. That makes me no better than him. Maybe worse, because I knew what I was doing." Clara's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "We all make choices in our pain, Bella. Doesn't mean we can't choose differently now." Bella reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "This is a donation, anonymous, to the women's shelter your church supports. I've been funding it for years through a shell company, but never attached my name. Never showed my face. I was ashamed to be seen doing good, like it wasn't glamorous enough." She placed it on the table. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to volunteer. Not as Bella Vance. Just Isabella, the girl who still believes her grandfather was right. True wealth is lifting others." Clara studied her. Not the model, not the millionaire, but the woman trembling beneath the surface, desperate to be known for who she truly was. Then, slowly, Clara reached out and took Bella's hand. "You don't need my forgiveness to start again, but you have it. And if you're willing to walk this path with honesty, then yes, come serve with us." Bella's breath hitched. A tear slipped down her cheek. "Why are you so kind to me?" "Because kindness isn't earned," Clara said softly. "It's given, just like grace." Outside, a bird sang from a bare tree branch. Inside, something shifted quietly, irrevocably. But even as peace settled between them, a shadow lingered. Because Daniel, watching from across the street, hidden behind the wheel of his car, having followed Bella out of guilt and curiosity, had seen everything. He'd seen Bella walk in with humility. He'd seen Clara open the door without hesitation. He'd seen them sit together like sisters, not rivals. And in that moment, the last illusion shattered. He hadn't lost a wife. He'd abandoned a sanctuary. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. He wanted to run inside, to fall to his knees, to beg. But something deeper held him back. A quiet, trembling voice inside that whispered, "You don't get to rush this. Redemption isn't a performance. It's a process." So he started the engine, drove away, but this time he didn't head to his penthouse. He drove to the address of the small church Clara attended, the one listed on the donation flyer he'd found crumpled in her old desk drawer. He parked around the corner, didn't go in, just sat there watching the modest building, the door opening and closing as people came and went. Ordinary people carrying extraordinary burdens, yet walking with a lightness he couldn't fathom. He opened his glove compartment and pulled out a small, leather-bound book he'd taken from Clara's nightstand the day he left. A Bible, her name written inside in delicate script. He hadn't opened it since. Now, with shaking hands, he turned to the first page. And for the first time in years, Daniel Hartwell didn't read to impress. He read to understand, to change, to return, not to a woman, but to the man he was meant to be. As dusk fell, the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows. Inside Clara's apartment, two women prayed together, Different pasts, shared pain, one hope, and miles away, in the silence of a borrowed car, a broken man began to kneel in spirit, whispering words he'd long forgotten. Lord, if you can forgive me, maybe I can learn to forgive myself. And if you can use her, maybe you can use me too. Bella knelt beside her, sleeves rolled up, sorting donated baby clothes into piles by size. Her designer manicure was gone, replaced by chipped polish and a bandage from helping move boxes at the shelter the day before. "You've got that look again," Bella said, glancing up with a small smile. "What look?" "The one that says you're carrying the weight of the world, and still smiling." Clara laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm not carrying the world, just this little one, and the hope that she'll grow up knowing she's loved, no matter what." Bella paused, holding up a tiny yellow onesie. "Do you ever wonder what her father will say when he sees her?" Clara's smile faded, but her eyes remained steady. "I used to pray he'd come back for her. Now, I pray he finds himself before it's too late. Not for me, but because every child deserves a father who knows what love really is." Just then, the doorbell chimed. Both women froze. It wasn't Pastor Michael's, he always texted first. It wasn't Mrs. Evans. She'd bring soup without knocking. And Daniel hadn't set foot near the building since that day he watched from the street. Bella stood, brushing off her jeans. "Want me to get it?" Clara nodded, heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. Bella opened the door, and there stood Pastor Elias, his coat dusted with snow, eyes gentle but urgent. "Clara," he said, stepping inside, "I'm sorry to come unannounced, but Daniel's been coming to early prayer service every morning for the past 2 weeks. Just sits in the back, doesn't speak to anyone. But yesterday, he asked to meet with me." Clara's breath caught. "What did he say?" Pastor Elias removed his gloves slowly. "He said he's been reading scripture, journaling, trying to understand what repentance really means. Not just saying sorry, but changing. He wants to make things right. But he's afraid you'll never see him as anything but a coward." Clara looked down at her hands, resting on her belly. The baby kicked, firm, insistent. "He's not wrong," she said softly. "But fear isn't the end of the story, is it?" Pastor Elias smiled. "No, grace is." Later that evening, after Pastor Elias left and Bella returned to her loft, Clara stood alone by the window, watching snow fall in slow, silent spirals. She reached for her journal and wrote, "Lord, I used to think strength was holding on. Now I know it's letting go of anger, of control, of the need to punish. If he's truly seeking you, then I won't stand in the way of your work in him. But I won't pretend either. Truth and grace must walk together." The next morning, at the church basement turned community center, Clara set up folding tables for the weekly support group. Bella arrived early, arms full of handmade blankets she'd stayed up stitching. "There for the new moms," she said, cheeks pink from the cold. "I figured every baby deserves to feel wrapped in love." As they worked side by side, arranging diapers, labeling bottles, laughing over mismatched socks, a young woman hesitantly entered. She couldn't have been more than 19, eyes red-rimmed, coat too thin for the weather, one hand protectively cradling her stomach. I saw the sign outside," she whispered. "Said you help pregnant women who don't have anyone." Clara stepped forward, not with pity, but with presence. "You're not alone anymore." As Clara guided her to a chair, offered tea, listened without judgment, Bella watched and saw herself in that girl's trembling hands. The fear, the shame, the desperate hope for someone to say, "You matter." Later, while washing dishes in the tiny kitchenette, Bella turned to Clara, voice thick. "How do you do it? Give so much when you've lost so much?" Clara dried her hands and looked at her, eyes luminous. "Because what I thought I lost was never mine to keep. My worth wasn't in his love. My purpose wasn't in his approval. God gave me this child and this calling, and that's enough." Bella leaned against the counter, tears spilling freely now. "I spent my life being adored by crowds and feeling invisible. You've been abandoned, and you radiate light. Clara stepped closer, placing a hand on Bella's arm. Then stay in the light with me. Outside, unnoticed, a figure stood in the shadow of the church steps. Daniel, coat collar turned up against the cold, watching through the frosted window. He saw Clara comforting the young woman. He saw Bella laughing through tears. He saw community, purpose, love, the kind that doesn't demand but gives. He didn't knock, didn't enter, but this time he didn't drive away either. He simply stood in the snow, hands in his pockets, head bowed, whispering into the winter air, "Teach me, God, teach me how to love like that." And as the first true snowfall of the season blanketed the city in white, a symbol, a journal, and a well-worn copy of the Sermon on the Mount, she sat cross-legged on the floor in sweatpants and an old university sweatshirt, staring at her reflection in the darkened screen of her phone. No notifications, no flashing alerts, just stillness. And for the first time in years, the stillness didn't terrify her. A knock sounded at the door, firm, familiar. Maya, her longtime assistant, stepped in without waiting, arms crossed, eyes narrowed with concern. "You've canceled 3 major brand deals," Maya said, voice low but urgent. "Your agent's calling me every hour. The Met Gala committee left a message. Is Bella retiring?" Bella didn't look up. "Maybe she is." Maya knelt in front of her. "Don't say that like it's a tragedy. You love modeling." "I loved the feeling it gave me," Bella corrected softly. "Being wanted, being seen. But it was never me they saw. It was the image, the fantasy." She finally met Maya's eyes. "Last week, at the church center, a little boy, no older than 4, held my hand while his mom filled out forms. He didn't know who I was, didn't care. He just said, 'You're warm.' And I cried all the way home." Maya's stern expression softened. "So what now? I don't know," Bella admitted. "But I can't go back to pretending." Later that afternoon, she drove herself, no driver, no tinted windows, to the church basement. Clara was there, helping a group of women assemble care packages. She looked up when Bella entered, her face lighting with quiet joy. "You came. I couldn't stay away," Bella said, slipping on an apron. "Feels like I'm finally breathing real air here." As they worked, folding tiny clothes, tucking in handwritten notes of encouragement, Clara glanced at Bella. "You seem lighter." "I am," Bella said, voice catching, "because I stopped running from who I really am. Turns out, the girl who inherited a tech company at 18, she's still in here. And she's been waiting to do something that matters." Clara smiled. "Your grandfather would be proud." That evening, as dusk painted the sky in lavender and gold, Bella walked home alone, her breath forming soft clouds in the cold air. She passed a luxury boutique where her face, airbrushed, flawless, smiled down from a massive ad banner. She paused, looked up at it, and felt nothing. No pride, no longing, just detachment, like seeing a stranger. Her phone buzzed, a text from Daniel. "I saw you at the church yesterday. You looked peaceful. I didn't say hello, didn't think I should, but I wanted you to know. I'm trying, really trying." Bella stared at the message. Not defensive, not demanding, just honest. She typed back slowly, fingers trembling slightly. "Peace isn't something you find in comfort, Daniel. It's something you build in truth. Keep showing up. Not for us, for him." She hit send, and for the first time didn't wait for a reply. Back in her loft, she opened her laptop and logged into a secure account she hadn't touched in months. The screen lit up with dashboards, stock portfolios, and the quiet hum of a renewable energy company that bore her grandfather's name and her silent legacy. She clicked New Project. Title Aloha Initiative, named after Clara's unborn daughter, a name that meant "God is my strength." Under mission statement, she typed to provide sustainable housing, maternal care, and spiritual support to women in crisis, because no woman should walk alone. Tears blurred her vision as she hit submit. This wasn't charity. It was calling. Outside, The city pulsed with noise and neon. But inside, in the quiet glow of a woman finally aligned with her purpose, something sacred took root. And miles away, in a modest apartment above a laundromat, where Daniel now lived, having sold his penthouse and donated half the proceeds to the same shelter, he read Bella's message again and again until the words sank into his bones. He closed his eyes, whispered a prayer, and reached for his coat. Not to chase, not to fix, but simply to show up. Tomorrow he would be at the early service again. And if Clara happened to be there serving coffee, he wouldn't speak unless spoken to. He'd just be present, quiet, humble, and finally truly trying. Because redemption wasn't a grand gesture. It was showing up, day after day, even when no one was watching. Mingled with the faint lavender of homemade soap, Clara's latest project with the expectant mothers group. She moved slowly now, her belly large and low, only weeks from her due date. Every step was deliberate, every breath a quiet prayer. Bella arrived early, as she had every Tuesday for the past month, arms full of folders and a thermos of mint tea. But today something was different. Her eyes held a new kind of light. Not just peace, but purpose sharpened by decision. "I did it," she said, voice low but trembling with emotion as she set the thermos down beside Clara. Clara looked up from sorting onesies. Did what? Bella took a deep breath and opened the top folder. Inside were architectural renderings, financial projections, and a letterhead that bore a name Clara had never seen before: Vance Renewables Foundation. "I launched it," Bella whispered. "The Aloha Initiative. Phase 1, a transitional housing facility for single mothers, with on-site childcare, counseling, and job training, fully funded. Sustainable energy, rooftop gardens, trauma-informed care." Clara's hands stilled. "Bella, this is incredible." "It's not mine," Bella said quickly. "It's ours. I've been quiet about my inheritance all these years because I didn't want people to see me as just a rich girl playing philanthropist. But hiding it didn't honor my grandfather. It just fed my pride." She looked down, voice thickening. "The truth is, I've been a millionaire since I was 18. My company, Vance Renewables, was founded by my grandfather. It's worth over $200 million. I kept modeling because I thought glamour would make me lovable. But it only made me lonely." Clara reached out and gently touched Bella's arm. "Why tell me now?" "Because you deserve to know who I really am," Bella said, meeting her eyes. "Not the girl Daniel left you for, the woman who walked away from that life because it was empty. And because, if this initiative is going to mean anything, it has to be built on truth, not image." Clara's eyes filled. She placed a hand on her belly, where a strong kick answered the moment like a seal of approval. "You're not just funding a building, Bella," she said softly. "You're offering hope, a second chance. That's kingdom work." Bella blinked back tears. I never thought I could be part of something like this. Something that matters." Just then, the door creaked open. Daniel stood in the doorway, hands in the pockets of a simple wool coat, hair shorter, face leaner, eyes clearer than Clara had seen in years. He wasn't dressed for a boardroom. He wore work boots, a flannel shirt, and the quiet humility of a man who'd learned to listen more than speak. He hesitated. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Clara didn't flinch, didn't look away. "You're not interrupting. Come in." He stepped inside slowly, eyes falling on the folder in Bella's hands. He recognized the Vance Renewables logo. It had been in business news for years, though no one ever connected it to her. "You own that company?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Bella nodded. "Always have." Daniel exhaled sharply, as if the air had been knocked from him. He turned to Clara, his voice breaking. "All this time, I left you, a woman carrying my child, living on hope and grace, for someone I thought was out of my league, not realizing she was never chasing wealth at all. She was hiding from it." He looked at Bella, then back at Clara. "And you never said a word, not out of spite, not to shame me. Because healing isn't about proving who was right," Clara said gently. "It's about making space for who we can become." A heavy silence settled, filled only by the distant hum of the city and the soft rustle of papers. Then Daniel did something unexpected. He knelt. Not in grand gesture, but in quiet surrender. Right there on the floor between them. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, voice raw. "But I want you both to know. I've signed over my controlling shares in Hartwell Properties to a trust that will fund maternal health programs internationally. I'm working construction now, real work with my hands. And every Sunday, I sit in that back pew. Not because I think God owes me anything, but because I finally believe he's real." He looked up at Clara, tears in his eyes. "If you ever let me meet her, our daughter, I won't waste it. I'll be the father she deserves, not the man I was." Clara didn't reach for him, didn't promise anything, but she did something deeper. She placed a hand over her heart, then over her womb and said, "Her name is Eloah, and she already knows what grace looks like, because she's been carried by it since day one." Outside, the wind stirred the bare branches of the oak tree in the churchyard. Inside, 3 broken lives stood in the fragile, luminous space between regret and church where Clara could recover after the birth. Furnished with soft linens, a rocking chair, and a shelf already lined with board books and a hand-stitched quilt. Daniel didn't show up uninvited. But small things began to appear: firewood stacked neatly by Clara's building. He'd been working part-time with a local restoration crew. Fresh groceries left anonymously at her door with a note that simply read, "For you and her." And one rainy afternoon, a repaired porch step, sanded smooth, freshly painted, no signature. Then came the evening of the community dinner. A modest gathering in the church basement to celebrate the launch of the Eloah Initiative's pilot program. Candles flickered on paper-covered tables. Laughter mingled with the clatter of serving trays, and children darted between chairs, sticky with apple juice and joy. Clara sat at the head table, radiant despite the fatigue that shadowed her eyes. Bella stood nearby, addressing the room with a humility that silenced chatter and drew every heart closer. "And this isn't just my project," she said, voice steady but warm. "It belongs to every woman who's ever been told she's not enough. Especially to one woman who showed me that true strength isn't in what you have, but in what you give." Her eyes found Clara's. Unspoken gratitude passed between them like a sacred thread. Later, as guests drifted toward dessert, Daniel lingered near the coffee station, filling cups for elderly volunteers, head low, shoulders tense. He hadn't expected to be invited, but Pastor Elias had simply said, "If your hands are willing to serve, your heart is welcome." Bella approached him then, holding 2 mugs. "You've changed," she said simply. He accepted the coffee, fingers brushing hers briefly. "Not fast enough. Not completely. But, yes." She leaned against the counter beside him, voice dropping. "You know, when you first came to me, you brought me a diamond necklace worth more than most people make in a decade." Daniel winced. "I thought that's what you'd want." "I told you I didn't need it," Bella said. "But you didn't hear me. You heard what you wanted to hear, that I was like everyone else chasing your money." He nodded, eyes fixed on his coffee. "I was so sure the world revolved around what I could offer. Power, luxury, status. I never considered that maybe the people who mattered most were offering something I couldn't buy." Bella turned to face him fully. "Do you see me now, Daniel? Not the model, not the millionaire, just Isabella, the woman who cried in her closet because no one knew her real name." He met her gaze, and for the first time, there was no performance in his eyes, only sorrow, clarity, and something like reverence. "Yes," he whispered, "and I'm ashamed it took losing everything to see you." And her, clearly. At that moment, Clara let out a soft gasp from across the room. She gripped the edge of the table, face tightening. Bella was there in an instant. "Clara, is it time?" Clara nodded, breath shallow. "It's starting. Earlier than expected. But it's okay." Panic flickered in Bella's eyes, but only for a second. Then she shifted into calm action. "Pastor Elias, call the midwife. Daniel, help me get her coat." Daniel froze for half a heartbeat, then moved. He didn't ask permission, didn't hesitate. He simply stepped forward, gently supporting Clara's elbow as she rose, his voice low and steady. "Lean on me. I've got you." She didn't pull away. As they walked slowly toward the exit, the room fell silent. Not out of spectacle, but out of awe. Because in that fragile, sacred moment, something profound was unfolding, not a man reclaiming what he'd lost, but a soul offering what he'd finally learned to give himself, without expectation. Outside, the night was cool and star-dusted. The midwife's car pulled up just as they reached the curb. "You'll be okay?" Daniel asked Clara, voice thick. She looked at him, not with the eyes of a betrayed wife, but with the quiet wisdom of a woman who'd walked through fire and come out carrying light. "God's with me," she said softly. "But it would mean something if you were too. Not as my husband, just as her father." His breath caught. He nodded once. "I'll be right behind you." As the car pulled away, Bella stood beside him on the sidewalk, arms crossed against the chill. "You're not the same man who walked out that penthouse door," she said. "No," he agreed. "I'm just a man trying to become worthy of the grace I've been given." Inside the car, Clara closed her eyes, one hand on her laboring belly, the other clutching a small cross Pastor Elias had pressed into her palm. Contractions rolled like waves, but under them pulsed a deeper certainty this child wasn't entering a broken world. She was entering a story already being healed. Stitch by stitch, prayer by prayer, act of courage by act of courage. And in the rearview mirror, as the church lights faded behind them, Clara saw two figures still standing on the curb. Once rivals, now quiet allies in she'd been so strong for so long. But now, alone in the dim light, Bella had been called away for an urgent board meeting on the housing permits, and Daniel waited respectfully in the hall, not wanting to overstep. Clara let the mask slip. Her hand trembled as it rested on her belly. The baby moved less now, conserving energy, the midwife had said, but the silence felt heavier. "Lord," she whispered, voice cracking. "What if I can't do this? What if I'm not enough for her? I've got no husband, no safety net, just this tiny life that depends on me." Tears slipped down her temples into her hair. "I've been trusting you, but right now, I'm so scared." A sudden sharp pain seized her, deeper than before. She gasped, clutching her stomach, the monitor spiking. A nurse rushed in. "Clara, your blood pressure, it's too high." And the baby's heart rate dipped. Clara's breath came in short bursts. "Is she? We're going to stabilize you," the nurse said firmly, already calling for the on-call OB. "You need to stay calm." But calm felt impossible. Between the pain and the fear, thoughts spiraled. What if something's wrong? What if I lose her after everything? After Daniel leaving, after fighting to stay whole? What if God lets me hold her for only a moment? The door opened. Daniel stood there, eyes wide with worry. "I heard the alarm. Are you?" "Stay," Clara said suddenly, surprising even herself. "Please, just stay." He didn't move to the bed, didn't take her hand, just stood by the window, a quiet sentinel. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice barely audible. Daniel's throat worked. "I know. Do you?" she asked, turning to look at him. "Because I don't just fear for her life. I fear raising her alone. I fear she'll ask about you, and I won't know what to say." He stepped closer, slowly, as if approaching sacred ground. "Tell her the truth," he said. "Tell her I was lost. Tell her I walked away from light because I loved the glitter of shadows. And tell her that meeting her is the one thing that made me want to come back. Not for you, not even for me, but for her." Clara swallowed hard. Another contraction rolled through her, slower this time, but deeper. "Daniel," she whispered, "if something happens to me, don't," he cut in, voice breaking. "Don't say that." "But if it does," she pressed, eyes locked on his. "Promise me you'll know her, love her, not as a billionaire trying to fix his mistake, but as a father who finally sees what matters." He knelt beside the bed then, not touching, just close enough that she could see the tears in his eyes. "I promise, with everything I am." Just then, Bella burst through the door, hair windswept, coat still on. I left the meeting. I didn't care. How is she? The baby's stressed, the nurse said. We may need to consider a C-section if labor doesn't progress safely. Bella went straight to Clara's side, taking her hand. You're not alone. I'm right here. Clara squeezed her hand, then looked between them. This man who'd broken her heart, this woman who'd helped her heal it. And in that fragile moment, she understood something profound. Family wasn't just blood. It was choice. It was presence. It was showing up when it mattered most. She closed her eyes, took a slow breath, and whispered, Lord, I'm still afraid, but I trust you with her, and with them. As if in answer, the baby kicked strong, determined. The monitor beeped steadily again. The nurse smiled. She's fighting, and so are you. Hours passed in a blur of pain, prayer, and perseverance. Daniel stayed. Bella stayed. Neither spoke much, just held space, brought water, whispered encouragement. And when, just before dawn, the first cry pierced the quiet of the delivery room, a sound so pure it felt like heaven breaking through, Clara wept openly, exhausted and radiant. She's here, the midwife said, placing the tiny, squirming bundle on Clara's chest. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down his face. Bella knelt beside the bed, gently brushing a finger over the baby's cheek. She's perfect. Clara looked down at her daughter. Rosebud lips, dark wisps of hair, eyes blinking open for the first time, and whispered, Eloa, my strength, my song. Then, after a long pause, she looked up at Daniel and held out her arms slightly. Just enough. He approached slowly, reverently, as if approaching an altar. And when Clara lifted Eloa toward him, he took her with trembling hands, his entire being softening. Hello, sweetheart, he whispered, voice thick. I'm so sorry I wasn't there sooner. Ere the church, its walls now adorned with hand-painted mobiles and framed verses about hope and new mercies. One Saturday morning, Clara dressed Eloa in a sunflower yellow onesie and wrapped her snugly in a cotton sling. She was heading to the community art gallery downtown, a small, sunlit space hosting a benefit exhibition for local women artists, many of them survivors of hardship. Bella had curated the show, and Clara had promised to come, if only to support her friend. The gallery buzzed with soft conversation, clinking teacups, and the gentle strum of an acoustic guitar in the corner. Clara moved slowly through the rooms, Eloa sleeping peacefully against her heart, until she paused before a single photograph displayed in a simple black frame. It wasn't a portrait of glamour or grandeur. It showed an elderly woman in a rural village, hands weathered but gentle, cradling a newborn while rain fell softly around her tin-roofed home. Beneath it, a caption read, Grace doesn't need a spotlight. It shines in the quiet places. Isabella Vance. Clara's breath caught. She hadn't known Bella took photographs. Real ones, not staged, not for fame, but for truth. That's my grandmother, a soft voice said behind her. Clara turned. Bella stood there, wearing a simple linen dress, hair loose, no makeup, just warm eyes and a hesitant smile. She looked free. You took this? Clara asked. In Kenya, 5 years ago, Bella said, stepping closer. I was there for a fashion shoot, but I spent every evening in the village. No one knew who I was, and for the first time, I felt seen. Not for my face, but for my heart. She glanced at Eloa, now stirring in her sleep. She's beautiful. She knows your voice, Clara said softly. She calms when you're near. Bella's eyes shimmered. I still can't believe I get to be part of her life. They walked together through the gallery, pausing at paintings of resilience. A mother holding her children after a fire, a young girl studying by candlelight, hands folded in prayer over a hospital bed. Then, in the far corner, Clara stopped. A painting hung alone on the wall. A woman in a hospital bed, hand on her pregnant belly, eyes closed in quiet trust, bathed in golden light. Beside her, 2 shadowed figures, one kneeling in prayer, the other standing guard like a sentinel. The title, She Carried Us All. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Bella, did you? No, Bella whispered, I didn't paint it, but I commissioned it. From a woman who stayed at the shelter last year. She said you reminded her of her own mother. Steady, even when the ground shook. Tears filled Clara's eyes. I didn't think anyone saw me like that. You were carrying more than a baby, Bella said gently. You were carrying us, me out of vanity, Daniel out of darkness, even that artist out of despair. You didn't know it, but your faith became someone else's lifeline. Just then, Eloa let out a soft coo, her tiny fingers stretching toward the light. Bella reached out instinctively, brushing a fingertip over the baby's palm. Eloa grasped it instantly, curling her fingers around Bella's like she'd known her forever. Oh, Bella gasped, tears falling freely now. She's holding me. Clara watched them, her heart swelling. She knows you're hers. In that moment, neither woman realized they were being watched. From the gallery entrance, Daniel stood just beyond the potted ferns, hands in his pockets, wearing the same flannel shirt and worn boots. He hadn't planned to come, but Pastor Elias had mentioned the show, and something in him needed to see it. Needed to see her. He saw Clara radiant in motherhood. He saw Bella, no longer the untouchable icon, but a woman kneeling in awe before a child who wasn't hers by blood, but clearly was by love. And he saw Eloa, his daughter, reaching for the very woman he'd once believed was his escape, only to discover she'd become part of his redemption. His throat tightened. He didn't approach. Not yet. But as he turned to leave, he caught Clara's eyes across the room. She didn't smile, didn't frown. She simply nodded once, acknowledging his presence, his journey, his silent change. And in that glance, a promise passed between them, not of reconciliation, not yet, but of possibility. Later that evening, as Clara rocked Eloa to sleep in her dimly lit apartment, Bella sat cross-legged on the floor, folding tiny laundry. You know, Bella said quietly, I used to think love was something you took, attention, admiration, devotion, but watching you, I see love as something you give, even when it costs you everything. Clara looked down at her daughter's peaceful face. And sometimes, it comes back to you in ways you never expected. Outside, the city hummed. But inside, in the quiet glow of a lamp and the soft rhythm of breath, a new kind of family was being stitched together. Not by past mistakes, but by present grace. He hadn't asked for it. He'd simply needed to see her. One evening, after a long shift hauling reclaimed wood for a church renovation project, he sat on the fire escape, the city lights flickering below like distant stars. His phone buzzed. A reminder: trust transfer complete, Hartwell Maternal Fund now active. He'd signed the final papers that morning. Every remaining asset from his old life, save a modest living stipend, was now irrevocably pledged to support single mothers in crisis. It should have felt like closure, but instead, a deeper ache settled in his chest. Because money couldn't buy back time. It couldn't undo the loneliness Clara had endured. It couldn't erase the nights Eloa would ask, "Where were you, Daddy?" He pulled out his journal, another habit borrowed from Clara's world, and wrote, "I thought I was giving something up, but I was only giving back what was never mine to keep. The real cost isn't in what I lost. It's in what I almost missed." The next morning, he walked to the church early, before sunrise, to help set up chairs for the weekly men's prayer group. Pastor Elias found him sweeping the entryway. "You've been consistent," the pastor said, leaning on his cane. "But consistency without vulnerability is just routine." Daniel paused, broom in hand. "I don't know how to be vulnerable. I spent years building walls so high, I forgot there was sky above them." "Then start small," Pastor Elias said gently. "Tell someone the truth. Not to fix it, just to say it." That afternoon, Daniel stood outside the community center, heart pounding. He hadn't come to see Clara, not directly, but he'd heard Bella would be there, reviewing blueprints for the new housing project. He knocked. She opened the door, surprised but not unwelcoming. "Daniel, come in." He stepped inside, eyes scanning the room. The same place where he'd knelt weeks ago in shame. Now it felt like holy ground. "I need to tell you something," he said, voice low. Not for forgiveness. Just so it's out there. Bella set down her pen. Okay. He took a shaky breath. When I left Clara, I told myself it was because I needed excitement. But the truth, I was terrified. Terrified of becoming a father. Terrified that I'd fail her the way my own father failed me. So I ran. Straight into the arms of someone who made me feel like I was still in control. He looked at Bella. Really looked at her. And I used you to do it. I saw your confidence, your independence, and I mistook it for strength. But real strength was in the woman I left behind. The one who stayed, even when she had every reason to walk away. Bella's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. I used you too, Daniel. I let you think I needed your world, when all I really needed was someone to see me. Not the image. A silence settled between them, heavy but cleansing. Then Daniel said the hardest words he'd ever spoken. I don't deserve to be in Aloa's life, but if God allows it, I want to earn it. Not with money, not with grand gestures, but with showing up day after day even when it's hard. Even when I'm not wanted. Bella studied him for a long moment. Then she walked to the window and pointed across the courtyard. Clara was there, sitting on a bench beneath the budding cherry tree, Aloa in her arms, reading softly from a board book. Sunlight dappled through the branches, catching the gold in Clara's hair. Go talk to her, Bella said quietly. Not as the man who left, but as the man you're becoming. Daniel's hands trembled. What if she says no? Then you'll know you tried, Bella replied. And that's more than you've ever done before. He stepped outside, legs unsteady, heart hammering like a drum. Clara looked up as he approached. She didn't stand, didn't smile, but she didn't look away. Hi, he said, stopping a few feet away. Hi, she answered, voice calm. Aloa gurgled, waving a tiny hand. Daniel's eyes filled instantly. She's even more beautiful up close. Clara shifted slightly. She knows your voice now. From the visits. From the stories Bella reads her. When you're working. He swallowed hard. Can I hold her? Clara hesitated, just a breath. Then, slowly, she stood and stepped forward. Hold her like she's your whole world, she said softly, placing Aloa in his arms. Because she is. The moment his daughter settled against his chest, something broke open inside him. Deep, ancient, final. He buried his face in the curve of her neck, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I'm so sorry, he whispered, more to Aloa than to Clara. I'm so sorry I wasn't here. Clara watched him, not with judgment, but with the quiet sorrow of someone who'd already forgiven, but was still learning to trust. And in that sunlit courtyard, as a broken man held his daughter for the first time, Bella had begun attending the early Sunday service, not as Isabella Vance the heiress or Bella the cover girl, but simply as Isabella, the woman who still stumbled over prayers, who cried during worship, who sat in the back row beside elderly widows and quietly passed tissues when needed. She'd started small, helping with nursery duty, bringing coffee for the choir, listening more than she spoke. The first time Pastor Elias asked her to share her story during testimony night, she'd shaken her head and whispered, "Not yet." But the second time, she stood. I used to think love was something you earned through beauty, success, control, she'd said, voice trembling but clear. But I met a woman who loved without conditions, even when I didn't deserve it. And in her grace, I saw a reflection of God's love for me. Not because of who I am, but because of who He is. Clara had been in the front row, Aloa asleep in her arms, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Now, on a quiet Tuesday morning, Bella arrived at the church earlier than usual. She wasn't there for a meeting or a project. She carried only a worn leather journal and a heart full of questions. She found Clara on the back steps, nursing Aloa in the morning sun, humming a lullaby that sounded like a psalm. Mind if I join you? Bella asked softly. Clara shifted to make space. Always. Bella sat, tucking her knees beneath her. I had a dream last night, she began, voice quiet. I was standing on a stage, lights blazing, thousands cheering, but I was completely alone. Then I woke up and all I wanted was this, right here. Sunlight, a baby's sigh, your silence. She turned to Clara. Why doesn't it scare me anymore? The quiet, because you're no longer running from yourself, Clara said gently. You're finally home. Bella's eyes filled. I keep thinking, what if I'd never met you? Would I still be posing for cameras, pretending my soul wasn't starving? Maybe, Clara admitted. Or maybe God had another path for you, but he chose this one, through brokenness, through truth, through us. Just then, Eloa finished nursing and let out a soft coo, her tiny fingers reaching for Bella's necklace. A simple silver cross Clara had given her on Easter. Bella lifted her gently, cradling her with practiced care. She trusts me, she whispered, awed, even though I don't deserve it. You do, Clara said firmly, not because of what you've done, but because love isn't earned, it's given, freely, just like grace. As Bella rocked Eloa, a memory surfaced, one she'd buried deep. When I was 12, my grandfather took me to a slum in Nairobi. I cried for days after. I asked him why God allowed such suffering. He said, because he's waiting for his children to step in. I forgot that for so long. I got lost in mirrors. She looked at Clara, eyes glistening. But now I see it. You've been stepping in long before I ever showed up. Clara reached out and touched Bella's hand. And now you're stepping in too. That's how the kingdom grows, one heart at a time. Later that afternoon, as Bella helped unpack boxes of donated diapers in the storage room, Daniel appeared in the doorway. He'd been coming more often, not just for visits with Eloa, but to help. He'd fixed every leaky faucet in the building, rebuilt the playground fence, and even started mentoring a teenage boy from the shelter who'd aged out of the system. Hey, he said, holding up a bag of groceries. Brought supplies. Thought you might need them. Bella smiled. You're becoming quite the handyman. Better than being a ghost in a penthouse, he said, his tone light but his eyes serious. She paused, then said quietly, Clara told me you've been seeing a counselor, that you're working through your father's abandonment. He nodded, looking down at his calloused hands. Turns out, you can't heal a wound you keep pretending isn't there. Bella stepped closer. I'm proud of you, Daniel. He looked up, startled. Why? Because real courage isn't in leaving, she said softly. It's in coming back, changed. Just then, Clara appeared in the hallway, holding Eloa, who squealed with delight at the sight of her father. She's been asking for you, Clara said with a small smile. Daniel's face softened instantly. Hey, sunshine. As he took Eloa into his arms, laughing at her babbling, Bella watched them. The billionaire who traded power for presence, the model who traded fame for faith, and the quiet woman who'd held them both together with nothing but grace. And in that ordinary moment, in a storage room filled with diapers and dust motes dancing in sunlight, something sacred unfolded, not a perfect family, but a redeemed one, stitched together by mercy, held by hope, and walking, step by trembling step, into a future they never saw coming, but were finally ready to embrace. Outside the church, bell rang for evening prayer. Inside, 3 hearts beat in fragile, faithful hands clasped tightly around something small and worn. Clara paused in the doorway, sensing the weight in the air. Bella, she asked softly. Bella didn't look up right away. When she did, her eyes were red-rimmed, raw, not with grief, but with a truth too heavy to carry alone. I found this in my grandfather's old desk, she whispered, holding out a faded photograph. It showed a young woman holding a baby, standing outside a small home with a tin roof and a garden bursting with sunflowers. On the back, in careful script, Grace in Jacamba, 1978. Clara sat beside her, Eloa now cooing in her arms. Who is she? My grandmother, Bella said, voice trembling. Not the society matriarch everyone knew, but the girl who raised my mother in a Nairobi slum after her husband left. She never remarried, never asked for help, just loved. She swallowed hard. All these years, I thought my legacy was wealth, But it was her quiet strength, her faith in God when the world offered nothing. And I walked away from that. I traded her sunflowers for spotlights. Clara placed a hand over Bella's. You didn't know. But I should have, Bella insisted, tears spilling. I had everything, her story, her values, her name, and I buried them under designer labels and magazine covers. And then I met you, and I saw what I'd lost. She turned to Clara, eyes wide with anguish. You were living the life my grandmother lived. Alone, pregnant, trusting God when everything else failed. And I was the one who helped tear that apart. Clara's breath caught. She hadn't expected this. Not now, not after everything they'd rebuilt together. I forgave you a long time ago, Bella, she said gently. But do you understand? Bella pressed, her voice breaking. I wasn't just Daniel's distraction. I was complicit. I let him believe I was everything you weren't. Strong, free, glamorous, when the truth is, you were the one with real courage. And I stood in the way of that. Silence filled the chapel, broken only by the drumming rain on the stained glass windows and Aloa's soft sighs. Then Clara did something unexpected. She shifted Aloa into one arm and reached into her own bag, pulling out a small, cloth-bound book, her prayer journal from the darkest days of her pregnancy. Read this, she said, opening it to a page near the end. Bella hesitated, then read aloud, voice unsteady. Lord, I don't understand why Daniel left, but I see Bella in him, lost, longing to be loved for who she really is. Protect her too, because if she's hurting enough to take my husband, she's hurting enough to need you. Bella's hands shook. You prayed for me. While your heart was breaking, Clara nodded, tears in her own eyes, because bitterness would have poisoned Aloa's future, and I refused to let pain steal her joy. Bella covered her face, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. How can you be so good? I'm not, Clara said firmly. I'm just surrendered. That's the difference. Just then, the chapel door creaked open. Daniel stood there, soaked from the rain, holding a stack of dry blankets for the shelter. He froze when he saw them. Clara radiant in grace, Bella shattered in repentance. He didn't speak, just set the blankets down and stepped back. But Clara called out softly, Daniel, stay. He turned, hesitant. Bella looked up at him, eyes streaming. I need you to hear this. He walked slowly down the aisle, stopping a few pews away. I lied to you, Bella said, voice raw but clear. Not with words, but with silence. I let you believe I needed your world, your money, your status, your escape. But the truth is, I was just as empty as you were. And I used your pain to fill mine. Daniel exhaled slowly, rainwater dripping from his hair. I know. You know, Bella whispered. I figured it out the night I saw you at Clara's door, he said. You didn't look triumphant. You looked lost, just like me. He stepped closer. I spent so long blaming myself for leaving Clara, but I never thanked her for showing me what real love looks like. And I never thanked you for showing me what real regret feels like, so I could finally change. Bella stood, wiping her tears. I don't want your thanks. I want your honesty. From now on, you'll have it, he promised. Then Clara stood too, Aloa now fussing softly in her arms. She looked at both of them, not as rivals, not as broken pieces, but as fellow travelers on a road only grace could pave. We've all been carrying secrets, she said, but today we lay them down. No more shadows, no more pretending. From this moment on, we walk in the light, together. Outside, the rain began to ease. A sliver of sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling across the chapel floor like liquid gold. And in that sacred space, 3 wounded souls, once bound by betrayal, now bound by truth, stood hand in hand over the ashes of their past, ready to build. But Bella had noticed something else. He still flinched when someone mentioned his old life, still looked away when luxury cars passed on the street. And though he held Aloa with growing confidence, there was a shadow in his eyes, a fear that he'd never be enough to make up for what he'd done. One evening, after a long day of overseeing construction on the new maternal housing project, Bella found him alone in the church courtyard, sitting on the same bench where Clara had first let him hold Aloha. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, and Daniel was staring at his hands as if they held answers. She sat beside him, not speaking at first, just breathing the same air. Finally, he broke the silence. I keep thinking, what if I slip back? What if the old me, the one who ran, comes back when things get hard? Bella looked at him, her voice steady. Then you'll choose differently, because you're not that man anymore. He shook his head. You don't know that. I left a woman carrying my child for someone I barely knew. That's not just a mistake, Bella. That's a wound. Yes, she said softly. But wounds can heal, and sometimes they leave scars that remind us not to repeat the pain. He turned to her, eyes glistening. Why are you still here after everything? After how I used you, how I hurt Clara. Why do you keep showing up for us? Bella took a deep breath. Because I see what you're becoming. And because I need to say this to you, Daniel. Not as your ex-lover, not as Clara's friend, but as someone who finally knows the truth. She faced him fully, her voice gaining strength. You don't get to hide behind your regret anymore. You don't get to play the role of the broken man who's trying while avoiding full accountability. Clara forgave you. Aloha trusts you. But forgiveness isn't permission to stay half-hearted. Daniel stiffened. What are you saying? I'm saying, Bella said, her voice trembling now with emotion, that if you're serious about being Aloha's father, if you truly want to walk in this new life, then you have to stop tiptoeing around the past. You have to look Clara in the eyes and tell her, without excuses, that you were wrong. Not just, I'm sorry I left, but I was selfish. I was afraid. I chose myself over you and our child. She leaned closer, intensity burning in her gaze. And you have to mean it, not to earn her back, but because it's the truth. Because grace isn't cheap. It's costly, and it demands honesty. Daniel's breath came fast. He looked away, jaw tight, then back at her. What if she shuts the door after that? Then you'll know you spoke the truth, Bella said gently. And truth is worth more than comfort. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of the city. Then Daniel stood, slowly, and brushed off his jeans. I've been so focused on proving I've changed, I forgot that real change starts with owning what I did. Bella stood too. She's inside, reading Aloha a bedtime story. She always waits until after 7 to put her down. He nodded, throat working. Thank you, Bella. For what? For not letting me off the hook. For seeing me, even the parts I'm ashamed of, and still believing I can be better. She touched his arm briefly. Go. And don't come back until you've said it all. Daniel walked to the church door, heart pounding like a drum. He found Clara in the small nursery room they'd set up for mothers in transition, rocking Aloha in the old wooden glider. The room was warm, lit by a single lamp, filled with the scent of baby powder and lavender. She looked up when he entered, calm but watchful. Can I stay for a few minutes? He asked. Of course, she said, shifting Aloha gently. She'll be asleep soon. He didn't sit, just stood by the window, hands clasped, gathering courage. Then he turned to her, eyes clear, voice steady but raw. Clara, I need to say something I should have said the day I walked out. She didn't interrupt, just listened. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you, he began, voice cracking. I left because I was terrified of becoming a father, terrified I'd fail her like my father failed me. And instead of facing that fear, I ran. I chose the easy lie over the hard truth. I told myself I was chasing freedom, but I was really just running from responsibility. He stepped closer, tears welling. And I used Bella, not because she was better than you, but because she didn't ask me to be more. You asked me to be a man of faith, of integrity, of love. And I wasn't ready. So I punished you for my own weakness. Clara's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. I was selfish, he said, the words heavy and true. I was cowardly, and I broke your heart when you deserved nothing but honor. I don't say this to earn your forgiveness. I already have that, and I don't deserve it. I say it because you deserve to hear the truth. And because Eloa deserves a father who knows the cost of his choices. Silence. Then Clara stood slowly, carefully placing Eloa in the crib. She walked toward him, stopping just an arm's length away. I've waited a long time to hear that, she said softly. Not for me, but for you. Because until you named your sin, you'd always be hiding from it. She looked into his eyes, really looked. You're not that man anymore, Daniel. But you won't fully be free until you stop carrying shame and start walking in grace. He nodded, tears falling freely now. Outside, the last light of day faded into night. But inside the nursery, something new was born. Not reconciliation, not yet, but the unshakable foundation of truth. And one rainy Wednesday, Clara found him in the church basement, sanding the edge of a crib he'd built from reclaimed wood. Smooth, sturdy, painted in soft white. He didn't look up as she entered, but his hands stilled when he heard her footsteps. You didn't have to do this, she said gently, nodding toward the crib. I know, he replied, voice low. But I wanted to, not for you, for her. Clara watched him for a moment. The careful way he ran his palm over the wood, testing for splinters, the quiet focus in his eyes. This wasn't the man who once signed billion-dollar deals without blinking. This was someone humbler, steadier, real. She's got your eyes, Clara said softly. Daniel looked up, surprised. Really deep brown, like earth after rain. She paused. But her smile, that's all mine. He smiled faintly. Good. She should have all the best parts. Silence settled between them, comfortable now, not strained. Outside, rain drummed against the windows. Then Clara said, Pastor Elias asked if you'd speak at the men's retreat next month. About your journey. Daniel froze. Me, why? Because you're living it, she said. Not perfectly, but honestly. He shook his head. I'm not ready to stand in front of a room and talk about faith like I've got it all figured out. You don't have to, Clara said, stepping closer. Just tell them how you got lost, and how you're still finding your way back. That's enough. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. What if I fail again? Then you'll get back up, she said simply. That's what grace is for. Later that evening, Daniel sat alone in his small apartment, the rain still falling outside. He opened his journal to a fresh page and began to write. Not for anyone else, just for himself, for God. I used to think redemption meant becoming someone new. But maybe it's just becoming who I was always meant to be. The man Clara saw before I walked away, the father Eloa deserves, the son of a father who never gave up on me. He closed the journal and looked out the window. The city lights shimmered through the rain like distant stars. The next morning, he arrived at the community center before sunrise. Bella was already there, reviewing final plans for the Eloa Initiative's grand opening. She looked up when he entered, coffee in hand. You look different, she said. How so? Lighter, like you finally put down the weight you've been carrying. He nodded. I told her everything. No excuses. Bella smiled softly. And she didn't flinch. She just saw me. All of me. Bella set down her papers. That's the gift she's always had. She sees people the way God does. Flawed, but beloved. They worked in companionable silence for a while, until Daniel spoke again, voice tentative. Bella, do you ever wonder if we're just pretending that one day the old wounds will reopen and we'll fall back into who we were? She turned to him, eyes steady. Every day. But then I remember grace isn't a feeling. It's a choice. And we keep choosing it. Over and over. Just then, Clara entered with Eloa in her arms, the baby babbling happily, reaching for the morning light. Daniel stood instinctively, heart swelling. Dada! Eloa squealed, arms outstretched. The word hit him like a wave. So simple, so sacred. He took her carefully, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Hey, sunshine. Clara watched them, a soft smile playing on her lips. She says it every morning now, like she's reminding you, or reminding me I'm hers, he whispered, as the three of them stood together in the sunlit room. No longer strangers, no longer enemies, but something new, something tenderly forged in fire. Bella felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest. This wasn't the end of the story, but it was the beginning of something truer. And later that week, when Daniel stood before a room of weary men at the retreat, hands trembling, voice unsteady, he didn't talk about wealth or success. He talked about shame, about running, about the moment he held his daughter for the first time and realized he'd almost missed everything that mattered. "I'm not here because I've arrived," he said, eyes glistening. "I'm here because I finally stopped running. And if God can redeem my mess, he can redeem yours too." No one clapped. They just nodded slow, tearful nods of recognition. Because in that room they saw themselves. And in that moment, Daniel understood his worth wasn't in what he'd lost, but in what he was becoming. A vessel of grace, cracked but still holding light. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sun broke through the clouds, warm and golden. And somewhere, in a quiet apartment not far away, a little girl laughed in her sleep. Unaware that her very existence was stitching broken hearts back, sunlight streamed through the apartment windows, catching dust motes and the pastel streamers Bella had hung the night before. A small cake sat on the kitchen table, homemade, slightly lopsided, decorated with a single candle and the words "Happy Birthday, Aloha" in careful script. Clara knelt beside the playmat, adjusting the tiny floral dress she'd sewn herself. Aloha sat on her knees, wide-eyed and grinning, tiny hands patting at the wrapped presents stacked beside her. Some from church families, some from Bella. One large box wrapped in brown paper with no name, but Clara knew who it was from. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in," Clara called, voice warm. Daniel stepped inside, holding a potted olive tree, its leaves silvery green, its roots wrapped in burlap. He wore simple clothes, his hair slightly tousled, but his eyes were clear, steady, full of something new. "Happy birthday, princess," he said softly, kneeling in front of Aloha. She squealed instantly, reaching for him with outstretched arms. "Dada!" He lifted her up, pressing a kiss to her cheek, then nodded toward the tree. "It's from the verse you love. Your children will be like olive shoots around your table. I planted it myself. Thought it could grow with her." Clara's throat tightened. "It's perfect." Bella arrived minutes later, arms full of balloons and a handmade photo album. Pages filled with images of Aloha's first year, her first smile, her first steps, her quiet naps in Clara's arms, her joyful giggles in Daniel's. "You've been documenting everything?" Clara whispered, flipping through the pages, tears welling. "Someone had to," Bella said, voice thick. "Because these moments, they're holy." As they gathered around the small table, candles lit, Clara closed her eyes and whispered a prayer only she and God could hear. "Thank you for carrying us through the storm. For letting me hold her through the nights I thought I'd break. For bringing them back. Not to me, but to you, and through you to her." Then she looked at Daniel and Bella, her voice soft but strong. "Make a wish with me," they nodded. Clara lifted Aloha onto her lap, the little girl reaching eagerly for the flame. "For her," Clara said. "For a life full of love, truth, and grace." "For her," Daniel echoed. "For her," Bella added, placing a hand over both of theirs. They blew out the candle together. Later, as Aloha smashed cake into her hair and laughed with pure, unburdened joy, Daniel sat beside Clara on the couch, watching her with a tenderness that no longer carried guilt, only gratitude. "I never imagined I'd get to see this," he said quietly. "Her first birthday, her first words, her first steps. I thought I'd forfeited all of it." Clara looked at him, her eyes glistening. "You didn't forfeit it, Daniel. You fought your way back. That's different." He swallowed hard. "Do you ever wonder what our life would have been like if I'd stayed every day?" she admitted. "But I don't live in that story anymore. I live in this one, the one where broken things are made new." Bella joined them, handing Daniel a cup of tea. "She called you Dada before she said Mama, you know?" Clara laughed softly. "She knew she had me forever. She was making sure you knew you belonged too." Daniel's breath caught. He looked down at his daughter, now crawling toward him with cake-smeared cheeks and eyes full of light, and something deep inside him settled, finally at peace. That night, after the presents were opened and the guests had gone, Clara stood on the balcony, the city lights glittering below. Daniel joined her, holding Aloha asleep against his chest. Her tiny fingers curled around his shirt. "She's dreaming," he whispered. "Of what?" Clara asked. "I don't know," he said, smiling. "But she's smiling too." They stood in silence for a long time, the weight of the past softened by the grace of the present. Then Clara turned to him, voice gentle but firm. "You're not just her father, Daniel. You're part of her story now. And that means you'll always be part of mine. Not as my husband, maybe not even as my friend in the way the world understands it, but as the man who chose to come back, changed." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I'll spend every day worthy of that trust." Inside, Bella watched them from the window. Two souls who'd once shattered each other, now standing together in quiet unity, centered not on romance, but on the sacred responsig for GEDs at the community tables, counselors offering quiet wisdom over cups of chamomile tea. And at the heart of it all, Bella. She no longer walked with the practiced poise of a runway model. Her steps were quieter now, purposeful, grounded. She wore her hair loose, her clothes simple, and carried a presence that drew people not with glamour, but with grace. One afternoon, she stood in the courtyard garden, teaching a group of young mothers how to plant herbs. Basil for healing, mint for calm, rosemary for remembrance. Her hands were in the soil, fingers stained with earth, when Maya, her former assistant, now the initiative's operations director, approached with a tablet in hand. "The board approved the expansion," Maya said, eyes bright. "We're breaking ground on the second site next spring, this time in New Orleans. And the UN just invited you to speak at the Women's Resilience Forum in Geneva." Bella didn't look up. She gently patted soil around a sprout. "Tell them I'll go, if I can bring Clara and Aloha with me." Maya smiled. "You know you're not just funding this, right? You're leading it." "I'm just stewarding what was always meant to be," Bella said softly. "My grandfather dreamed of places where women could breathe again. Clara showed me what that looks like in real life. And Aloha, she reminds me why it matters." As the women laughed and chatted around her, Bella's eyes drifted to the far bench beneath the maple tree. Clara sat there, reading aloud from a picture book while Aloha, now walking with fierce determination, toddled after fallen leaves. Daniel sat beside them, not intruding, just present, holding a repair kit, fixing a wobbly stroller wheel with careful hands. Bella walked over, brushing dirt from her jeans. "Remember when I thought changing the world meant being on a magazine cover," she said, sitting beside Clara. Clara looked up and smiled. "Now you're changing it one woman at a time. Because you taught me that real impact isn't measured in followers," Bella said, voice thick with emotion, "but in faithfulness." Just then, Aloha stumbled, scraping her knee. She didn't cry, just looked up, eyes wide, waiting. Daniel was there instantly, lifting her gently. "Let's get you cleaned up, brave girl." As he carried her inside, Clara watched him go, then turned to Bella. "He's different, isn't he?" "He's himself now," Bella said. "Not the man the world wanted him to be. Just Daniel." Later that evening, after the center had quieted and the last volunteer had left, Bella stood alone in the main hall, running her fingers along the wall where names of supported women were painted in soft gold, over 200 and counting. A voice broke the silence. "You built something beautiful." She turned. Daniel stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, no longer hesitant, just humble. "I didn't build it," she said. "We all did. You with your hands, Clara with her heart, and me with my second chance." He stepped inside, glancing at the names. "I saw Maria today, the young mom from the shelter. She got her nursing certification. She hugged me and said, 'Tell Aloha I'll be her nurse someday.'" Bella laughed through tears. "She already calls you Mr. Fix-It." He smiled, then grew serious. "I've been thinking about the penthouse." Bella tensed slightly. "What about it?" "I sold it." Months ago. But I kept one thing. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. Not jewelry. Inside was a key. The old Hartwell building downtown, the one that's been empty since the merger. I bought it back. Not as an investment. As a gift. Bella frowned. A gift? To the initiative, he said. It'll be the national headquarters. Offices, training space, emergency housing. Fully renovated. I've already drawn up the plans. Bella stared at him, stunned. Daniel, that building is worth millions. And it's empty, he said simply. But it could hold hope. For hundreds more women. For generations. Tears filled her eyes. Why? Because I finally understand what wealth is for, he said, voice quiet but firm. It's not to hoard. It's to heal. She took the key, her fingers trembling. You're not doing this to win Clara back, are you? He looked her straight in the eyes. No, I'm doing it because I finally see the world through her eyes, and yours. And it's more beautiful than anything I ever owned. Outside, the wind stirred the fallen leaves into a swirling dance. Inside, two souls who had once been tangled in illusion now stood in the clear light of purpose. And the next morning, when Bella stood before the initiative's board to announce the new headquarters, she didn't speak as Isabella Vance the heiress or Bella the icon. She spoke as a woman who had been lost and found, and now carried a sacred trust. This isn't my legacy, she told them, voice steady, eyes shining. It's ours. And it belongs to every woman who dares to believe she's worth more than her past. As she spoke, across town, Clara held Aloha on her hip, watching Daniel teach a group of teen dads how to change diapers with patience and care. And in that moment, she knew this wasn't just a second chance. It was a new creation, woven from broken threads, yes, but now shimmering with the gold of grace, resilience, and love that refused to let go. And somewhere, in the quiet rhythm of lives being rebuilt, the story whispered forward, still unfolding, still full of promise, still breathing with the sacred hope that they were, but into something deeper, truer. The Aloha Initiative now spanned 3 states, its name spoken not in headlines, but in hushed prayers of women who'd found shelter, dignity, and hope within its walls. And at its heart, 2 women, once strangers, once rivals, now moved as sisters in grace. It was a crisp October morning when Clara walked through the gates of the original center, Aloha, now 5, skipping ahead in a sunflower yellow dress, her dark curls bouncing, her laughter ringing like bells. She paused at the olive tree Daniel had planted the day she turned 1. It now stood tall, branches strong, leaves silver in the autumn light. Mama, look, it's got olives, she cried, pointing. Clara knelt beside her, brushing a leaf. Just like the verse. Your children will be like olive shoots around your table. Aloha tilted her head. Does that mean I'm supposed to be strong? You already are, Clara said, kissing her forehead. From the courtyard path, Bella approached, not in designer heels, but in worn boots and a soft cardigan. Her hair streaked with early silver she no longer dyed. She carried a basket of freshly baked bread, still her Sunday ritual. She's getting taller every time I see her, Bella said, smiling as Aloha ran to hug her. Auntie Bella, Aloha exclaimed, squeezing her tight. Daddy's inside fixing the swing set again. Bella laughed. Of course he is. They walked together toward the community hall, where a small gathering was assembling, not for a gala or a press event, but for the dedication of a new wing, the Grace Haven, named after Bella's grandmother. Inside, sunlight poured through stained glass windows gifted by a local artist. A mosaic of women holding hands across generations, cultures, and stories. Daniel was there, kneeling beside a little boy whose father had recently passed, showing him how to hammer a nail straight. His hands were rough now, calloused from years of honest work. Not on skyscrapers, but on playgrounds, porches, and the frames of doors opening into new lives. He looked up as they entered, and his smile, once polished, now warm and real, spread across his face. Hey, he said to Clara, rising. Hey, she replied, no hesitation, no shadow. They stood together for a moment, not as former spouses, but as co-guardians of something sacred, the life they'd almost lost, and the legacy they'd rebuilt. Pastor Elias stepped to the front, his voice gentle but strong. Today, we don't celebrate a building. We celebrate what happens when broken people choose grace over guilt, truth over image, and love over pride. His eyes found Clara, then Bella, then Daniel. You three walked through fire, and instead of burning, you became light for others. After the ceremony, as guests mingled over spiced cider and honey cakes, Bella pulled Clara aside near the garden. I got the call this morning, she said quietly. The Nairobi project, they broke ground yesterday. My grandmother's village. They're building the first maternal center there next month. Clara's eyes filled. She'd be so proud of you. I'm not doing it for her, Bella said, voice trembling. I'm doing it because of you. You showed me that real wealth isn't what you keep. It's what you give away. Just then, Eloa tugged at Daniel's sleeve. Daddy, will you push me on the swing? He didn't hesitate. Always. As he lifted her onto the newly repaired seat, Clara watched them, her daughter's joy, his quiet devotion, and felt a peace settle deep in her bones. Not the peace of a perfect life, but of a redeemed one. Later, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in rose and gold, the four of them sat together on the old bench beneath the maple tree. Clara, Bella, Daniel, and Eloa curled between them, half asleep, head on her father's shoulder. You know, Bella said softly, I used to think love was something you earned through being seen, but you taught me, Clara, that love is something you offer, even when no one's watching. Clara leaned back, watching the leaves drift down like gentle benedictions. And you taught me, Bella, that humility is the bravest kind of strength. Daniel looked at both of them, his voice barely above a whisper. And you both taught me that redemption isn't a moment. It's 1,000 choices to show up, even when you don't deserve to. Eloa stirred, blinking sleepily. Are we a family? She asked, voice small. They exchanged glances, not with awkwardness, but with a shared understanding deeper than blood. Yes, sweetheart, Clara said, taking her hand. We're a family born not from perfection, but from grace. And in that quiet twilight, as the first stars blinked awake above them, the story came full circle, not with a grand finale, but with a quiet promise that even the most broken beginnings can lead to beautiful legacies, when hearts choose to heal, not just for themselves, but for the ones who will come.